Welcome to the Three Parallels podcast with your host, the Dr. Branch, where we rediscover who we were, embrace who we are, and make room for who we're trying to become. The content of this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. The information shared, including any materials linked to this podcast, is not a substitute for professional advice, therapy, diagnosis, treatment from a physician, therapist, coach, or other qualified professional. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are my own and do not reflect any of those organizations or affiliations that I may be connected with. This podcast is designed for edutainment purposes, which is the blend of education and entertainment. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Gator Talk. Gator Talk is the post-show Q&A session for the podcast. Every Friday, let's get ready to take the Three Parallels podcast beyond the episode. Join me, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 p.m. Eastern for Gator Talk, our exclusive post-show Q&A session. Kick back, relax, step into the living room, a space for open, laid-back conversations with your hosts, me, Dr. Jason Branch, and fellow listeners. Let's break it all down together, what resonated, what hit home, and what's shifting in your journey from who you were to who you are and who you are becoming. It's real, it's raw, it's Gator Talk. Don't just listen, join the conversation. See you Friday. The Gator Scales Journal. It's game time. The Three Parallels podcast just leveled up with a powerful new resource for your journey and transformation. Introducing the Gator Scales Journal, your personal guide to shifting you from who you were to embracing who you are and to recognize who you are becoming. This isn't just a journal, it's a game changer for your growth, mindset, and evolution. Click the link to order your copy today or check it out on Amazon. Take ownership of your progress and don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and comment. Let's get to work, baby Gators. Are you stuck in the trunk of your own car, watching life pass you by? It's time to slide into the driver's seat with a licensed therapist as your co-pilot. Whether it's your first time in therapy, you need a push for growth, or you finally ready to invest in your mental wellness, I got you. With over 20 years of experience, I help people move from who they were to embrace who they are and make room for who they're trying to become. Therapy with me is real, raw, intentional, authentic, and of course, hilarious. Let's break some cycles together, shift your mindset, and unlock your best self. I'm on the passenger side messing with the radio, holding the map up, and we're going wherever you would like to go. Give us a call today at 404-436-2540 or shoot me a text to book your free consultation. Check us out on the web at www.drjbranch.com. Look forward to connecting with you. Have a great day. Welcome back to the Three Parallels podcast with your host, the Dr. Jason Branch, where we rediscover who we were, we embrace who we are, and we make room for who we're trying to become. And on today's show, I got somebody for y'all. This is family. And y'all know when I bring family on, we have a good time. We do this anyway. We just inviting y'all into the conversation. And today's guest is a friend, is a brother, is a colleague, is a mentor. He's a legend. This guy does everything. He's done everything. He's doing everything, and he's still doing it. Matt Angler Carlson is who I'm talking about. So I know y'all getting excited because I am. So this man, I was introduced to several years ago at a conference in Atlanta when I was a doc student by my mentor, Dr. Linwood Vereen. And anytime Linwood introduced me to people, he has this barometer. I don't know if anybody noticed. I'm gonna put his business out. He has this barometer where if he's excited about introducing me to somebody, I know that person is somebody. And if it's kind of like, this is such and such, I know that person may not be. So this is the secret. When he introduced me to Matt, he lit up. And I was like, this guy is somebody. And I would love to connect with him. And it was an instant connection that we had. Fast forward, years later, I moved to California, my wife and I, Mia, come to find out, Matt was Mia's professor and mentor. Profession is super small, y'all. 2 to 3 degrees of separation. Anybody want to connect with, from myself to Matt to Oprah, whoever you want to connect with is only 2 to 3 degrees separation. And now here we are, full circle. I'm having him on this show to give you all himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, and family, I would love to introduce you to Matt Angler Carlson. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks so much, Jason. That's a nice introduction. And yeah, it's funny how things turn out, right? You never, serendipity happens, as they say. You never know exactly how you get where you are, and you unpack it later and like, well, that's how it happened.
That's how it happened. And here we are, full circle. Now you're on the podcast, and I can't wait to hear what comes up. So I'm curious to know your story, because there's a lot of people in this profession, and we get into this profession for different reasons. I'm curious to hear your reasons of why you decided, like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's for me, I realize everyone's experiences are very different in terms of kind of how they got to where they are. And in many ways for me, I have a very, I think, blessed or gifted introduction into the field because my father was in the field. And in that sense, my father, John Carlson, was very involved in counselor education and very involved in psychology. And so I think my introduction to the field is actually through my parents and my father in particular. And, in a sense, like I unpack this sometimes and I tell people like, my father was my school counselor, right? So he,
Mm,
but not only that, like I spent a lot of time with my dad growing up. We had a really good relationship and, his friends, in the field, this would be in the mid 70s, were mainly Adlerian. So I grew up Adlerian. I like to tell people like, meaning literally I grew up um, Adlerian, that things were done to me in an Adlerian way. And as I read later on, I read like my textbooks and my master's program, and I was reading like some parenting books, and I was like, oh, this sounds a little too close to home. Like,
mm.
but this wasn't unknown to me. Like I knew this. Like I knew my parents' friends were whether psychologists or counselor educators. They were involved with developmental guidance, and you know, in the 70s, that movement essentially is what SEL is today, and that developmental
Mm.
guidance as that was created, my sister and I actually were like the test subjects for a lot of that stuff. So
Wow.
they created
Wow.
puppets and we'd play with the puppets and say if we liked it, we listened to the music. And, we can go back to, if you go back to some of the early elementary school journals in the late 70s, there's actually photos of my sister and I in that journal of doing things. And like, it's a way of saying like, I was brought into this field through my dad. And I tell people I've been going to ACA since, the early 70s, in which I would be sitting in the back room playing by myself. And eventually I got to the front.
Wow.
Um, so in that sense, like I kind of knew what it meant to be a counselor, therapist, psychologist very early on. I grew up in a relatively small town and my dad was the only kind of therapist. And so um, I knew about the life of a therapist, meaning that he would, hey, my friends would see him and they would tell me that, oh, I saw your dad today. Um, so I knew what he did, but my dad also would talk at times about some of the conflicts around like, hey, if you're my child,
Mhm.
how you carry yourself matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
powerful.
because and I don't think he meant it in a coercive way, right? Like, you know, so don't party. It was more like who you are reflects on me. So if
Mm.
people are going to come to me for parenting advice and my son's a wild child, why would they come to me for advice, right? And
Wow.
so I had that introduction, I understood it, and so even when I went on to college, both my parents were very much like, do whatever you want to do, like go
Hmm.
figure out what you want to do. Um, but the die was cast, if that makes sense. Like it was very much cast that I clearly slid into psychology early, and just had just an awareness about it that I realized a lot of my peers didn't have. So there's a lot of privilege that came with that, obviously, and a lot of insight, and also I think some responsibility how I carry myself. And so so in that sense, like in my job now at Cal State Fullerton, I work a lot with historically underrepresented grad students, and I work a lot with first gen grad students, and that wasn't me.
Mm.
I'm essentially second gen grad student, right? But my dad happens to have two doctorates. Um,
Yeah.
so like I grew up and I knew I was going to get a PhD before I even left high school.
Yeah.
Like there
Yeah.
was never this question about that. It was just in what and when.
Hmm.
But I always kind of saw myself as an academic,
Yeah.
that I wanted to do that. So again, coming into the field, I naturally found myself kind of weaving into different areas of psychology. And in many ways, my father also um, certainly was proud of me, and I knew that, and would involve me in his life. But he was also very careful of staying in his own lane. Like he didn't want me to be a protege and didn't want to be seen as um, he certainly, I mean, he helped me, but he also didn't want to look like I was going to be a junior him. And I think he had
Yeah.
seen enough junior hymns in his life.
Hmm.
Like there's a handful of people who, parents do what they do. And my dad was very clearly about, I realize I can't uninfluence you, but I don't want to overly influence you in a way to do things um, the way I do them or my own kind of projects. But naturally we did find different ways to coalesce and share some very common ideas. And so in a nutshell, I would say like I kind of knew I was going to do this. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. But if I look back now, I think, well, of
Yeah.
course it was going to be mental health. And of course it was going to be, psychology and counseling and essentially, and I, in many ways, I'm a counselor educator today. But I view myself as honestly like an allied mental health professional,
Yeah.
because I work in psych and I work in counseling and I work in social work and nursing and human services and I know the distinction, but I don't think the work that I do is defined by that distinction.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your truth. This is the space for it. And I'm curious because the duo, I think about the father-son duo right now, currently in our time, is related to sports with LeBron and
Yeah,
Bronny, because that's how I view
yeah,
your dad and you. Like that's the
yeah,
level that y'all on. Like it's
yeah, yeah,
from one legend to the next, and you're a legend in your own right. And you kind of had that training not to be in the shadow, but to create your own. And I'm curious, how did you find balance to? I'm not trying to be like my dad, but I'm in this space with my dad. And just growing up in that space, how did you find balance to find your voice and find your truth and who you are? Because you're not your dad, and that's evident.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
how did you do that?
Yeah, it's funny using the kind of sports analogy too, because like I did a lot of sports with my dad, right? Like people may not know this, but my father was a competitive runner. He was a very competitive marathoner in the 70s and 80s, and in an obsessive way. And he was a college cross country coach, so he coached
Wow.
college cross country that he ran with his runners, and he would beat them. Like he was
Wow.
very competitive. He
Wow.
he coached Olympic level track and field people, and I was with him for all of this.
Mm.
Like it's funny, I felt more pressure growing up about being a competitive runner than I ever did anything else from him. um, so I ran all like I was running at the age of 4. Like
Wow.
I mean, my first Nikes were the first Nikes. I'm not even joking. It's like, I wish I had those. I wouldn't be doing this anymore.
Oh,
I'd be selling those on
oh
eBay.
yes. Oh yes, absolutely. You can retire. You can retire
Yeah.
off of those.
I mean, like my first
That's
Nikes
incredible.
were right off the waffle press. I mean,
Wow.
but I grew up in a field of runners. So I like
Mhm.
other people were into NFL and NBA. I could tell you, the starting seven on the NCAA winning men's cross country team.
Wow.
Um, so I had that kind of piece around that, and later on that became shared. Like it was a
Mm.
thing that we shared between us. And what I really liked about um, my dad, which was I think really unique at the time, as I realize now, is that my parents had 2 children when they were young.
Mhm.
Like they were still adolescents, as we know now, right? So they had, before 2023, they had 2 kids, and they were trying to manage their lives. And I think they weren't ready to have kids, and they weren't ready necessarily to be together, even in that sense. And they figured it out.
Mm.
And we had a lot of moves and a lot of things happened. And I have a lot of compassion now, as my parents have both passed, as I unpack their lives and kind of what they went through to make ends meet. But what I really liked about them is I think my dad, was in his 30s when I was essentially, in high school. And I think he was reliving some of his youth through me,
Mm.
meaning that um, my dad was I'm into music big time. My dad got into
Mm.
music, and he would very much, anything I was listening to, he wanted to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I went to concerts with my dad that like people were like, you wouldn't saw, Fishbone with your dad? And I was like, yeah. And I said, David Bowie with my mom. And like, like my parents like were very much like met me at my level as opposed to saying, here's my world. They were very much with all my siblings, like teach me about your world.
Mm,
And I think that child focused part, I think
yeah,
helped me develop interests that were independent.
yeah, yeah. That's
And then later in life, as I think as coming out of adolescence and knowing more who I was, and I realized that I didn't love running as much as maybe my dad thought I did. um, and I got into cycling more. My dad got into cycling.
mm,
I think my dad viewed it as, oh, here's a way that I can connect with my son more, and the same way that with my other siblings, whatever they would into, he got into, so that he
yeah,
could spend time with them.
that's
And
incredible.
yeah, and I think that's a really important thing I kind of learned is that, again, it's like I have children too. It's like, I don't need to bring them to my world. I want to invest in their world, and I want to know what makes them excited. And I want to know, you know, I don't think they really care what an 18-year-old back in 1989 cares about, but I want to know about what an 18-year-old in 2023 cares about, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that helped me kind of develop this independence piece. And the second piece I would say is that I think that there was certainly privilege in my family as being the youngest. I mean, I'm not the youngest anymore, but I grew
Mhm.
up the youngest. And if you know anything about birth order, like I'm essentially I'm the second oldest of five, right? So I have five
Mhm.
children, but there's a 9-year gap between my next
Yeah,
sister. So I
yeah.
grew up a youngest,
Uh-huh.
like psychological position, as we say.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think I got a lot of freedom from that. Like I think
yeah.
that there were some elements around kind of given permission to do things that maybe my sister wasn't given.
Mhm.
And of course my sister snowplowed for me. So
Yeah, yeah.
she made the mistakes and I learned not to make them. So
Gotcha.
um
Gotcha. So
yeah,
I am
yeah,
curious, and I appreciate you, owning and knowing that privilege and having that
yeah,
privilege and even having it, your humility, your authenticity, to me, it's remarkable. I'm a fan because when we met, I didn't have anything to go by. I mean, I just heard the stories, his dad, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't know what to expect. But when I met you. I didn't
yeah,
meet your dad. I
yeah,
didn't meet,
yeah,
I met you, and that's who I became cool and close with. So I'm curious, even growing up with that privilege, and you look at the life that you have now, you're a giver. You're constantly giving and pouring in and sharing. And a lot of people that have privilege, number one, you don't have to give back. You don't have to care, but you
yeah,
do. And I feel as though, regardless of how you grew up, you found a way to use your privilege to help so many people. And it just seems seamless. Like this is who you are. How did this
yeah,
happen? Because a lot of people wouldn't dare, wouldn't
yeah,
dare do the things that you've done and to be so passionate about it and selfless in it. How did that develop?
yeah. I mean, it's funny. And I appreciate you saying that, Jason, because I feel the same towards you too. Like there's a mutuality around the giving
Mm,
and transparency in
yeah.
that first of all, I'm addicted to that anyway. So like that's the people I want to invite into my life too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think when I think about it, like I actually think about my mom a lot.
Mm,
That my mom, both my parents, I think would consider themselves activists, so to speak.
mhm,
Like they're both children of the 60s and, you know, and I always laugh and thinking like my dad would consider herself like very activist, but my mom really was, you know, um, and I mean, like remember going to Greenpeace marches with my mother in the 70s. Like we lived in Hawaii at the time, and fighting, for whales, was a big thing. And I remember going to protests, and my mom was a strong feminist, and I think that she um, certainly embodied that in my sister, my older sister, but also in me. Like, and it wasn't like my family dynamic. Like my father worked outside the home, my mom worked in the home.
mhm.
Um, Both parents had college degrees. My mom raised 5 kids,
Yeah.
and she gave up a lot for that.
Mm.
Like she gave a lot of her own dreams and fantasies and things that she wanted to do at the expense of my father. And I saw that.
Yeah.
Um, but I also had these experiences, I think, around just empathy and compassion. Again, on the professional side through my father, knowing who he worked with, right? Like I knew there was addiction and I knew there was sexual abuse and I knew there was these ills in the world and I didn't need an after school special to teach me that.
Hmm.
Like I could see it in my community, I could see it in my friends with a so I think I already always had like a predisposition precociousness around some of that, like that that I understood a bit more that like you know, I understood who my father was working with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think I grew up in a pretty, I lived in a lot of places, but I spent most of my formative years in kind of Wisconsin in a I would consider a rural town with high affluence in some ways, and yet
Hmm.
also much more working class, middle class farmers as well.
Yeah.
And was attuned to class differences, like very much class differences
Hmm.
in a place like that, in which you work in a resort town with mansions on the lake, and yet the labor came from the town, right?
Yeah.
So I think I had a class consciousness really clear, and I guess two things also stand out for me too is that you know I was aware early as well, even not just around kind of feminist and kind of gender issues, around GLBT issues too, and that
Mm.
I had a one of my cousins um, was gay, and his confidant was my mother,
Hmm.
and the exposure, and this was someone who as a child I adored,
Yeah.
as I thought he was the coolest person in the world, and
Yeah.
then later I learned about his life, and I the pain in his life, and eventually he got HIV and died of AIDS. But the exposure to that at an early age too, around like, oh, this is what happens, um, and this is what happens to some people and how they're treated by society and their families, like has a compassion for me around that. And another thing, and I had an aunt. I had a my dad's sister, and aunt, who was very formative in my life too, where she was kind of this amazing woman who also raised children and was a house mom, and then had a conflictual divorce due to a
Mm.
variety of domestic issues, and reinvented herself later in life and became a
Yeah.
small business owner. And so she had an ice cream parlor where I grew up, and she was the only person who would hire the black students and kids.
Wow. Wow.
There wasn't a huge population where I grew up, but my aunt would hire anyone if they were willing to work, and
Mm.
she would, honestly, like she didn't care where you came from. She cared that you wanted to work, and then she would drive you home at night. Like
Wow.
she'd open this restaurant, and then she'd drive all the teenagers home. And I think,
Mm.
and in that place too, again, there's a class consciousness that comes from working in retail and working in restaurants and working with different walks of life. Um, and I had a lot of inspiration from my aunt, who was worked hard, and you know I think provided for a lot of people an environment that I think was pretty racist and pretty classist.
Yeah. It's honest.
um,
That's honest.
yeah, honest. And I think I look at that now and think like these were the pillars of my community, who kind of, in a way, there's a very Adlerian social interest thing around wanting to be larger than yourself, or being connected to something larger than yourself. And I think for me that's very true.
Yeah. Oh man, incredible. Thank you. These are the conversations that we don't have access to. A lot of times we
Yeah,
don't have access. So a lot of people know of you, they know your work, they know the things that you've done, but they don't get the chance to know the person oftentimes. And
yeah,
that's why I
yeah,
love
yeah,
this podcast, because it gives us an opportunity to be seen. People may
yeah,
admire and respect and love us, but they don't know us. And this is an
yeah,
opportunity for people to get to know the human, the
yeah,
person. And you mentioned early, and I really appreciate you sharing all of this, because at any point in time you could have decided to go a different route, even being with exposed to all these different things. You mentioned earlier about developing or finding your identity. If you could share with us like that journey of that discovery, because you were surrounded by so many different types of people and identities and cultures and class and race, all of that, and you still was able to curate your own. Again, I love
Yeah.
you as a person because you are who you are. How did you do that? And what was that process of developing a sense of identity? Because, and I say this because there's a lot of people in this profession and out and all over the world that no matter where they are and what age they are, they may not have developed their own identity yet. So
Yeah.
how did you do that?
It's really, it's such a, it's a great question, Jason. I appreciate just reflecting about like that piece, because I mean, I'm older, so I think about this stuff these days. As a parent, I've got a 21-year-old, I have a 16-year-old, and I have an infant who's a year and a half. And I just think about like the lives they're going to lead. And as a parent, how do you parent in a way that allows their own self to emerge in a healthy way? And um, I think honestly, there's a ways in which early exposure to some stuff was
Mm-hmm.
good. Like I mentioned earlier, I moved a lot. Like I think, I was born in Michigan, moved to Illinois, moved to Florida, then moved to Hawaii, and then moved to Wisconsin, all before the age of 6.
Wow. Wow.
And there's a lot of shuffling around. And I think that the Hawaii experiences were pretty formative in some ways, just because I was in classes where I was the only white person.
Mm-hmm.
I was a haole, as they said. And and I look back, and so again, this recognition of difference, if that makes sense, like,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
recognition about different cultures and backgrounds. Just, again, at that age, I don't have a full consciousness of it, right? But I have this awareness of it. And I have these formative moments where I'm also aware that, like, um, I absolutely, as a child, had ADHD and was like off the charts, like in
Mm-hmm.
terms of hyperactivity and impulsiveness. And I can look back now and think like how my parents managed that, because
Yeah.
they did. Like I was never diagnosed formally. I am
Mm-hmm.
now, but only recently. But it's a known fact, like in my family, that like, oh yeah, um,
We already
uh,
knew. Like,
I already knew this already, and I look back now and I'm like, oh wait a minute, like why is it from, because I went to a small rural school of like 12 kids in my class, and I can remember from like third grade easily through sixth grade, my desk was by itself. Like the
mm,
class all sat in rows, and then I was sitting in a corner. And at
wow.
the time, I thought that was cool,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now I realize that I was in the corner because I would drive everyone nuts if I wasn't.
You sound
Right?
like somebody I know, Matt. You
Yeah.
sound like somebody I know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
But and I say that because I realized like one of the interventions I got was I had a limited ability to leave my classroom and go to the library. And I would go to
Mm,
the library and just read voraciously, right? And read, 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 read,
yeah.
read. And I remember, and I again, I think this comes a lot of kind of who I am, and is, you know, I remember reading books on history, and I read a lot of biographies, right? And I remember reading a book on MLK Jr., right? And then I read a book on Malcolm X,
Mm.
right? And I fully realized I was the only person who probably ever read that book on Malcolm X.
These are facts. These are facts.
Ever, ever, ever. But I remember reading those two books, and this is probably like fourth grade or so. And I remember kind of having this experience around like, and then and as context, my mom also grew up in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
would constantly go back and forth between like Wisconsin and like Kentucky,
Yeah.
and I was filtering what I was seeing in Kentucky through the eyes of kind of racial prejudice and discrimination, Jim Crow laws. And at that point, not having learned formally about like Jim Crow laws, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And the injustice around that, like around like this disconnect around, the way you think the world is and the way that the world is
Mm-hmm.
at
Ooh,
that
ooh.
time.
Hold on. Ooh, time out. Oh, wait. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You drop it. Listen, y'all just got hit in the head with a honey bun and you don't even know it. Could you say that again? Yeah, could
Yeah, yeah, it's that moment in which the way you think the world is versus the way the world really is, right? And that sheen comes off, and I
Mhm.
realized like, and I realized I was young for this, but I was having moments like that were pretty, like I can look back now and think like, there was certainly elements around race around that, and because I would see this piece, because we would live in a rural community, and then we would drive into urban areas, right? You
Mm-hmm.
drive into Chicago or Milwaukee, and I would see just housing projects, and I would see that I became attuned to how things were talked about on the news, and like who were they showing on the news, and who was getting murdered and who was getting arrested, and and again, I'm young, but I'm really aware of these things happening around me, and so and at the same time, I also had this awareness around some gender stuff, which is not surprising because I do gender stuff, primarily men's work. But I remember at a young age, I remember like probably this was sixth grade, like being exposed to like the first time around dating. Like I knew what
Mm-hmm.
dating was, but like having dating, like actually having a girlfriend supposedly, which just
Yeah.
meant passing notes in class, right? But I remember like that being very confusing too.
Mm.
And I remember at times during recess, because we saw a lot of recess, I'd walk with one of my friends, and we would say, oh, we're just gonna go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd walk around the school, and in that walk we would walk and talk, and we would talk about the strangeness around, like, honestly, our inner worlds.
Yeah.
We would
Yeah.
talk about this inner world stuff that was really vulnerable, like about how we're
Mm-hmm.
feeling about like this girl, or how we're dating, or just, and I realized even at that time, like there was this understanding that I had this inner world that was real,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had this external world that was frankly bullshit,
Ooh,
right?
ooh, we going
Around,
there. We going there.
right. So the external world is saying, again, be tough, be strong. Not explicitly saying don't have feelings, but no one had feelings, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
action, violence, all this stuff, boom, 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 boom. And at the time, recognizing like my lived experience, or however, is not that. My lived experience is that I have feelings, and my lived experiences is that I might get into fights, but I don't enjoy getting into fights. Like I don't want to get into fights. My lived
Mm-hmm.
experiences, I'm finding myself hide parts of who I am because I know the ramifications around other boys if I do share this stuff, right? And
Mm.
and again, and it's bullshit,
Yeah.
because if
Yeah.
I feel this way and my friend feels this way, we can't be the only
Yes.
two.
Yes. Oh man. Ooh, we got to go here. We got to go here. Because it sounds like you were developing emotional intelligence and going against the grain and systems and beliefs and ideas, ideology. You went against that even as a child,
Yeah, yeah,
and you saw things for what they were. And how I describe it, I love analogies. I use analogies. What you're talking about, I describe to be the beach and the sandbox.
yeah,
For us as humans, we live on the beach. That we have that ability, we have that freedom. However, there's a sandbox, there's borders, there's parameters, there's structures, there's systems that somebody created or a group of people created that many of us try to live in or try to recreate with
yeah,
perfectionism that doesn't work. But we do it anyway because we believe this is what we're supposed to do. So you saw as a child, I belong on the beach, baby. I
yeah.
cannot be in this sandbox playing with y'all. How was that, even as a child, to see that, to know that, did you speak about it? Did you talk about it? But you were developing emotional intelligence as a child. And for me, and I work with a lot of men as well, some men I work with between 30 and 60 never heard of the word
Yeah,
emotional intelligence. And you
yeah.
were exposed to it at that time. So how did that impact your life? And I'm sure it shifted your perspective in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I think in the biggest piece I would say is that I think, again, as a boy, you know, it again, and it wasn't like my life was perfect, and it wasn't like my family life was perfect, and there wasn't conflictual things happening in my family. Like, whether it's my nuclear family or my larger family of origin, like there were things happening, right? And for all of us, like shit happens in your family, and you try to figure out like, okay, well, my uncle's on vacation for a month,
Yes,
and wait a
indeed.
minute, and now he doesn't like Budweiser anymore, or
Yes, indeed.
right. So
Yes,
it's like, and
indeed.
and no one tells you these things. um
Matt,
um
you're speaking to all humans right now, okay?
yeah,
Because everybody
yeah,
has an uncle or an
yeah,
auntie. We got somebody that we know that nobody's talking about. And
right,
you
right,
saw it then, you know it then.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so I think I saw, like, again, like, and we discredit children for not seeing these things, but it's like, I knew
Mhm.
like you had this compass, like I knew which houses I felt safe in.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when I would go to my friend's house, I knew which parents like I enjoyed being around and which parents I thought were mean, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I also knew a bit around like it wasn't really about me, if that makes sense. Like that's a
Yes,
protective
indeed.
factor, right?
Oh
Oh
man.
wait, this shit isn't
you
really
you
about
were
me. This is
so
about
like you was 30 years old when you was 6, man. Like what's
yeah.
going on?
I have to admit, I did read some of my dad's psych books. So, as that
You had
ADHD child. So,
you had so much knowledge at such a young age, and this is so great for me because I didn't know a lot of these things you share. I knew you share a lot, but I didn't know this part of it, and it's so profound
yeah,
because it's part of why you do the things you do. It's part of who you are. Goes back to the
yeah,
question with identity, and to me, it's a gift. It's a gift, and you're using that gift to your advantage, not just for you, but everybody around you. It's a beautiful
yeah.
thing. That's a
Thanks.
beautiful
I
thing.
appreciate that because I think it's nice to talk about it because sometimes I don't connect the dots in the same way.
Hmm.
And you say
Hmm.
things like I'm saying things that I haven't maybe said before in that way,
Yeah.
and I'm certainly thinking about certain people as I say it and certain experiences, but you asked earlier, like, and so how did that evolve? And I think it evolved in ways which I found myself like I could code switch too. Like,
Hmm.
so it's like, I'm white, but white guys code switch too, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Like
Tell us about it for those who
you,
may not know. Share with us.
like I can, knowing that piece, for example, like I was a jock in high school, like I played sports, I, did all kinds of things. And I could find ways to kind of code switch across social groups pretty easily. Like
Hmm.
I could be friends with the kids in tech and vocational track. I knew people who were like in FFA, which is Future Farmers of America, right? I knew
Hmm.
people in
Hmm.
sports. I knew the academic folks. Like and I sang choir, right? So I knew the theater people. Like,
Yeah.
and I could find ways to kind of code switch and adapt like a chameleon to the people around me. Um, and I'd like to think with some authenticity, right? It's not all wearing, you know, a fake kind of shield around like you're code switching and you're a chameleon, but you're adapting to these places. And I think as I got older, what and that's high school for a lot of people, I realized, but
Yeah.
later it became much more around like, I am going to spend time around people like me. I'm going to
Hmm.
find ways to kind of find people who obviously with the value aligned or just, so for me, the best things in my life have been the friends I've had and colleagues who are friends. Because
Hmm.
if I have colleagues, I want to be friends, right? So creating these kind of networks around that, around people who maybe again share the same values, um,
Yeah.
which allow me also to be transparent. Like I think
Yeah.
as I've become later in life, like that has absolutely become some of the most important things. Is kind of a less of a disconnect between the inner and outer, and they're just
Yeah.
being one. Like
Yeah.
what you get is what you get, and
Yes,
what
indeed.
you see on the inside is what's happening outside. And I'm not going to code switch anymore.
Oh
Um,
man, powerful, powerful. Which full circle, this connects the dots of why Linwood knew that you and I would do so well. He just knew,
yeah,
like, man, y'all good, y'all good. He knew. He made
I
the
don't even know.
introduction. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's funny. I don't even know how I met Linwood, but I remember. But at some point, we started around the same time,
Uh-huh.
and I'm sure that we saw each other. I'm sure we saw each other doing the same thing,
Yep.
which was basically at a conference, not going to the presentation, but
Yep.
sitting outside socializing.
Yep. That's the story. That's the story. He said, y'all made eye contact. The rest was history.
And that's it. Actually, is like when I see him, I know it's real, and
Yeah.
I know like yeah, we do pleasantries, but
Hmm.
then we just get right back into the other real stuff. And I, in many ways, he's a friend, he's a brother to me because we actually, oddly enough, kind of lead some parallel lives right now.
Hmm. Yes,
Like
indeed.
I've had conversations with him. I was like, you won't believe what's happening to me right now. And his response is, well, I do because that's happening to me too. And we had
and
a yeah.
and
So
this is again full circle, full circle. I appreciate you sharing all of this. I do feel this is my belief, and this is happening organically. There's a connection that all three of us share that I think relates to ADHD. Just my humble opinion.
Yeah.
You mentioned, and I would
Yeah.
love to hear your perspective because, again, so many people are going undiagnosed, which is fine. You can live that life, but knowing this diagnosis or knowing how you think differently or how you move and navigate differently, knowing that you can give yourself tools and equip yourself with ways to move differently. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could share your story related to not being diagnosed and then as an adult finding out. I would love to hear more because you and I share a parallel universe with that I'll share
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you said is spot on for that, which is like, again, this wasn't an unknown thing to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a way in which I remember things that were said about being a motor mouth. I mean, things around some hyperactivity. And I absolutely found ways to channel that as a strength. I think
Hmm.
part of running for me was a strength. Part of sports was a strength. Being given environments like, you know, again, it was a different time, I know, but like the fact that my mom could drop me off at the public library and not come back for 3 hours, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the librarians would look after me, but I could do whatever I wanted, meaning I could
Hmm.
flit around, right? So I could
Yeah.
read, I could like I could listen to music, which is what I did, right?
Yeah.
And so I was in environments in which it wasn't so oppressive. Um, and I think in a way it allowed me to just channel some of that energy into interests.
Hmm.
Um, and for the most part, I would say like that's who I am, and that's who
Yeah.
I have been, and I've been successful with it. Like I'm not like I've done fine. I can
Hmm.
write and I can publish and I can carry conversation and I can get the job done. And um, but more recently, what I've been aware of is that we know a lot more about how ADHD isn't just a intrapersonal event; it's an
Right.
interpersonal event.
Absolutely.
And I look at how with my partner, you know, coming to the realization like how is this impacting my partner?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So,
And but someone who bluntly enough, who I love, is also transparent and comes back and can say with honesty, this is how it impacts me,
wow, that's incredible.
which is I accept you, but this is how it impacts me, and I'm not, and I'm saying I asked that question because I have a hunch, right? Like
Mhm.
I have a hunch it's impacting, and
Yeah.
having a conversation about it with her about okay, so what if we looked at something else? What if I didn't always change the topic? And what if I found ways to kind of stay, more focused on, you know, current events or kind of current events between us. And
Mhm.
so in that supportive environment, I think that's kind of was like, oh, let's try this experiment now because my life
Yeah.
has shifted and frankly the world has shifted. So
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
yeah.
So, did you like go get tested, get diagnosed, medication, any of that?
Yeah, I mean it's funny, yes. And but in the way I do things, like yes, I went to my doctor and said I want this. I got referred to a psychiatrist, was like really like like a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And again, Jason, at my core, I'm a counselor educator. I do supervision. So when I go to a helping professional and I can't help want to supervise a little bit. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. This is the worst evaluation I've ever seen in my life. Um, it was so, honestly, it was so like subpar. And but it's been very helpful in my teaching. I can go back and
Yeah.
tell my students, hey, let me tell you what you should never do.
So, and
Um,
and how old were you at that time?
oh, this was like in the past 4 months. This is
Matt,
very
now,
recent.
now,
Yeah.
Matt, this is why this show is so organic. You say it past few months. Mine was the past few days.
Okay.
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 So I didn't know. Same thing. Like I said, I feel like I'm talking to myself. For me, growing up, school was an issue because nothing interests me. The things that we were talking about didn't interest me. The things I did, I was all in. But the things I didn't, I'm cracking jokes, I'm playing, doing whatever. And my
Yeah.
whole life, my family been saying, he probably got ADHD. He's so hyper. He's this. My aunties, he probably needs some reeling. But I never got diagnosed, never took medication. And as time went on, me being older and just learning more, seeing more, I decided, let me go get checked out. Let me see if I do actually
Yeah.
have it. This was a few weeks ago, Matt. A
Wow.
few weeks
Wow.
ago.
Yeah.
420 to be exact, because they asked, "Hey, are you using any substances?" And I'm like, "It was 420, but I'm not using anything,"
Yeah.
because they had to do a
Yeah.
drug test to
Right.
determine what they were going to prescribe. And I'm like, "Yeah, drug test be fine, whatever." But that's how I remember. That's when it happened. It was 421 because of 420 the day
Yeah.
before. That just happened, and ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD combined type. And now I'm start
Right.
learning and diving into the research, considering medication management. But it's a world I didn't know anything about. And
Right.
so
Right.
many of us live in this world that we don't know anything about, because
Yeah.
we're living, we're surviving, we're thriving.
Yeah.
But to me, the awareness and the education around it, and again, similar to you, I'm looking at my psychiatrist like, where were you trained? Like
Yeah.
this is not the best. This is the worst. Like, do you treat all your patients like this? I was the
Yeah.
worst, meaning the best because I was advocating for myself. I was speaking up and speaking out, and I just didn't like how things were done. And it was great for me as a counselor educator to be on the other side, again, to use this in the classroom and to have the experiences that enhances who we are, personally and professionally. And again, parallel universes, we're in the same space with this. And to me, us talking about it gives so many other people permission to consider what else is going on with me, or what else is it about
Yeah.
me that I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, as you say that, I feel like I know a lot about the diagnosis and I've known a lot about it. And like my ex is a school psychologist and, does this diagnosis and was with me for 20 plus years. Right. And I have
Mhm.
records, for example, of kind of testing that was done throughout my life. Because, you know, this is a strange aside, but like, my dad was a school psychologist too. And so he had to learn how to do the testing, and he, often would practice doing the whisk and the waste and things like that on me and my sister and my siblings.
Right.
Um, and even from those diagnoses, like a funny story is like one of the first dates I had with my ex, like she's in school psych and she had to learn how to give the whisk. So she's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
let me give this to you." I'm like, "Oh, sure, whatever." And we did it. And at the end, she's like, "All right, well, I know where your IQ is, but she's like, but that's secondary." She's like, "The first thing I would do is refer you immediately for ADHD assessment."
What a first day. What
I know.
a
And so I was like, "Well, you and my father both." So um, so it's been this funny, like, it's not funny, but it's been a joke within my family and people I know that this is me because it hasn't caused me the pain, right?
Yeah.
Like, because
Mhm.
I've coped, but that's not the experience of so many people. And I feel like
Agreed.
I go into this psychiatry experience and I, again, I don't know more than the psychiatrist, but I know a lot. And I
Yeah.
think I
Yeah.
can surf and manage this myself. But what
Mhm.
what if that wasn't me?
Exactly. Exactly.
And how does
Yeah.
that person get anything out of this? And so what do they get out of this? A medication? That's it? Like, is there some
Yeah.
insight, some understanding about like what this means for their life? And as a parent, like that's the part for me is the compassion part. Again, it's like I had this experience, I can reflect on it, but this isn't a very good experience for people.
Yes. Yes. Oh man. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to the table again. It's organic. You can put a Dole or Chiquita's banana sticker on our forehead because we are
Yeah,
organic. We are
yeah,
connected in so many different ways. This connects
yeah,
us even more. So now I want to move, because I want to be mindful of your time. You're a busy,
yeah,
busy
absolutely.
man. A couple rapid fire questions. I'm curious because the show, Three Parallels, who we were, who we
Yeah,
are, who we're becoming. How would you describe in one word for each? How would you describe the old you, the current you, the better you? Who you were, who you are, who you're becoming.
yeah. I mean, based on our conversation, I would say precocious was the old me,
Okay.
like that, and um, I think the current me is um, I want to say the word engaged because I'm really engaged in so many facets of life, and I am. And I think the where I'm going, you know, um, that's a harder one. But I mean, but I guess I would say endless horizon in some ways. Like I'm super excited about the future
Love it.
and my part
Love
in
it.
it. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So curious, what's a word, phrase, memory, or moment that has stuck with you personally or professionally?
God, there's so many. There's so many. But I mean, I'll share one that relates to all of that, and it's a harder memory for me.
Hmm.
But I had this memory when I was younger, and I probably was 5, and I'd gone on a school field trip, and we were this was in Hawaii, and I don't know where we were. But we were on some kind of a lake, and we were on a boat that had a motor, and there were all a bunch of school kids, I think, and and some of the kids had brought like nets you might use to get guppies or minnows or things like that, and like they were just dragging me in the water, with this notion that somehow they're going to catch a big fish.
Yeah.
And I didn't have one, and I remember one of my friends was another little girl, and I asked her if I could use her net, and she was like, fine, and she gave it to me, and I put it in the water, and it immediately got shot into the water and disappeared, and I
Wow.
lost it.
Yeah.
And the the memory for me is this, in you know I think my friend was probably upset, right, and sad that she had lost her net, but within reason, right? The
Hmm.
memory for me is an eternal feeling of feeling so much shame in that moment,
Mm.
a feeling like horrible that I had essentially borrowed something and lost it, and it was a very impactful feeling because I still remember it today, 50 years later, and it's something that I to tap into. I think just this recognition of the role of shame in men's lives and boys' lives,
Hmm.
and how, again, like on the outside, people just saw a boy who lost something, probably not a big deal, and wasn't being treated poorly by my friend. But the internal world of me was one in which I was just beating the shit out of myself and feeling so horrible about that moment.
Powerful. Powerful. And thank
Yeah.
you for sharing. Again, your stories, your experiences humanizes us because it's
Yeah.
real. A lot of times people look at our degrees and what we've done and put us on this pedestal like we're not human. And these moments is our
Yeah.
humanness, and we share it,
Yeah.
which lets us know, all of us know, like it's not the degree, position, title, money. We're human. We all
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So with that said, I'm curious from being 30 at 6 years old all the way to all the way to now. I'm curious to know, what have you learned about people and what have you learned about yourself after all these years?
Yeah. I mean, we have more in common than we do differences. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Even though we accentuate differences, um, which clouds commonality, but we have a lot more in common than we think. So I certainly know that piece, and I think that actually helps me lean into difficult conversations with people, in knowing that there's always going to be some shared ground if you work enough to find it.
powerful, powerful. Man, I could talk to you all day. Please, man, please. We can do this all day.
I know.
So, last thing is an opportunity. I mean, you've given so much, so much. And the last is life work. So on this show, we don't do homework. We do life work. Homework, you take it
Yeah.
home, you do it, you never remember it. Life work, you take it home, you do it, your life can change, you can shift. So if you can offer some life work to the listeners, anything, an idea, thought, whatever you want to share to get people to consider a pivot, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because I think that it's so much easier to talk about work. Here's what I'm doing. Um, um,
That's why we here. That's why the show is what the
yeah,
show is.
yeah. I mean, but in thinking about that question, I think what I would say this is that, like, um, for me, the some of the greatest challenges in my life, and also the best moments of my life, are when I essentially took a risk.
Mm,
And I don't mean it like I jumped out of an airplane. Like, that was not that's a risk, but that's not what I mean. I mean, when I took an interpersonal risk. So,
mm,
like, when I said the thing that was hard, or when I stood up for myself, or I said something with outcome unknown, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think for me, as I've gotten older, like I can reflect back on those moments, and some of them have to do with like, moments of dating relationships where I shared how I felt, or I tried to cut through things. Other times have been personal experiences or professional in which you know, it was, I said how I felt in the room when that maybe wasn't where the room was going, right?
Hmm.
But for me, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's like the life work is transparency for me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that is for me, and I say that at, 54, and honestly, my life is pretty good. I've been successful in many things I wanted to do. I've got three healthy children. I have a loving relationship. I've got siblings who I care about me. But I also say that knowing that like it isn't all easy. Like I've been through an incredible amount of loss in my life in the past 10 years that has greatly impacted kind of how I exist on this earth, like at my core. Um, and I think coming out of that and kind of managing like ending of one long-term relationship and starting a new one in the middle of this, and also COVID, like that's not, all this happening at the same time. There's a way
Hmm.
around how I want to walk the earth, and it's with transparency. It's honesty and transparency, and kind of in a way saying the hard thing. Does that make sense? Like
Yes,
so I made a
indeed.
pledge to myself many years ago that I was going to say the hard thing from now on. I was no longer gonna debate it.
Whew, you just
So
blessed some folks. I need you to know that you just blessed a lot of folks. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate this knowledge, this wisdom, your expertise, your authenticity, your transparency, your story, your journey. I'm having you back. Just know that you're coming back. So, so just know that. The last piece is an opportunity for you to share you. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, somebody wants to reach you, any information you want to share. Also, product services, what you're doing. Like you got podcasts, like you're doing a lot. So, share whatever you want to share to let listeners know how to tap in.
yeah, I mean, honestly, people can find me pretty easy. It's a hyphenated last name. There aren't many out there, but you can find me through my university website. It's really easy, and it's Matt Angler Carlson. You'll find me. And you can. So I don't have handlers. I'm not famous. You reach out to me, I'll reach back out to you. Like I'm happy to kind of build community and build connection, and it's important. In terms of the stuff I do that I really care a lot about, like I spent most of my professional career one way or another looking at the health of kind of men and boys, and kind of trying to pivot the messaging. And I think we're in a unique moment where some things are happening. And I spend most of my time these days kind of focusing on healthy boyhood and what that looks like, and how do you operationalize it in school settings, and how do we move away from problem discourse into more preventative kind of ways of helping kind of boys live authentic lives. And if that's important to you, I guess it's a way of saying it's important to other people too. And there are ways in which you don't have to do this work alone. There are a lot of organizations and like-minded, caring individuals who want to be involved, and it cuts across disciplines. So if you're a counselor and you want to stay in the counselor silo, you can, but it's pretty darn small. So get out.
Yes, get out.
Um,
You made my whole month, and we just this May 1st. You made my whole.
yeah,
Wow, I love it, Matt. I've got to give you a flower. We got to end with some flowers. Thank you
uh,
for being you, man. Thank you for being
yeah.
you. Thank you for bringing me in, pulling me in, taking care of me, my family, just being a great person and deciding to share your greatness with other people. And one thing I learned about the greatness is you can't stop it. So it's only going to get better from here. I love you. I appreciate you. You are a gift to this profession. You are a gift to the world. I'm thankful to be in your circle. As a friend, a colleague, as a brother, I appreciate you for gracing us with your presence because you could have been anywhere in life. You chose here to be here with us. I thank you and I appreciate you, man. Any last words? Anything else you want to share before we close out?
Just honestly, just thank you and gratitude to you too. And I love you too. And I love your partner, and you're beautiful together. And it makes me so happy when two wonderful people find each other. and then have wonderful children on top of that. So just again, thank you for what you're doing for this podcast, and just, I think, transparency and trying to have real conversations, and you being you and the way you do it. Like I say this, with the impact you have on me, but I also know the impact you have on students and other people. And so we can't say thank you enough.
Thank you. 100%.
Awesome.
All right. This has been another episode of Three Parallels Podcast with your host, the Dr. Jason Branch, where we rediscover who we were, embrace who we are, make room for who we're trying to become. If this episode, which I know it did, has impacted you, influenced you, blessed you in any way, shape, form, or fashion, don't keep it to yourself. Give it away. And as Dr. Englar-Carlson said, get out. No, get out. And that can be connected to all things. So thank you to you, Matt. Thank you for who you are and what you bring to the table. This episode has blessed me. I'm sure it's helped other people. Continue being you and doing what you do. For you all that's listening, don't take this episode as entertainment or just getting to know us and our business. I need you to take this and give it to somebody to help them. If they're struggling, if they're dealing with things, if there's exposure needed, whatever the case may be, use this as a tool to continue to give, to serve, to help. Much love. Peace.